Coming up, your Brooklyn Nets fall in game one on the road to the Philadelphia 76ers. They had a clear plan of attack. They battled for 3 quarters, but unfortunately collapsed late. We break down the strategy, the bright shining star that is Mikal Bridges, and a problem that could linger throughout the series, all coming up next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. Over there, you're going to find Doug Norrie, owner-operator of DFSR, for all your daily fantasy sports rankings from DraftKings to FanDuel. He's got you covered. I'm Adam Armbrecht, breaking down the New York Football Giants on the One Giant podcast and the playoff-bound New Jersey Devils on the Devils Puck Luck podcast. We thank you for making us your first listen of the day, free on all those great platforms, and tell you, today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Did you know, my friends, that Prize Picks has a first-time user receiving 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code LOCKEDON? That's prizepicks.com, promo code LOCKEDON. And Doug, this is going to be interesting because we have to start with the Brooklyn Nets losing to the Philadelphia 76ers, the final 121-101. It gets away from Brooklyn late. There are a lot of positives to take away from this game. Mikhail Bridges, Cam Johnson, Nicolas Claxton. We will get to those. But at the top, it's the loss and the strategy. And I think what a lot of fans are going to visually be frustrated by, that lack of perimeter defense, which we will explain.
Yeah, look, we always knew this was going to be a really tough series. Philly's a really good team. This is a very specific matchup that is not put a lot in the Nets' favor. You know, a lot of times in these playoffs, you can look at all these individual teams and matchups, and a lot of times you can say, hey, it's going to be rough here, but here this team might have an advantage. The Nets don't really have much of that in this case. They don't have the 2 best players in the series, probably, depending on where you want to put Mikhail versus Harden at this point. So probably got to lean Harden. So this is we always knew this was going to be a very, very difficult matchup. I think starting from that standpoint is really good to ground ourselves and make sure we have a good anchor here for what the rest of what we're going to talk about was. This is going to be tough. And you know, for the most part, I think the Nets strategically played out a lot of things that we thought they were going to do. Outcome wise, it was rough to watch at times. And It does beg the question of what happens the rest of these series. These series are never as bad as what it looks like at its worst, and never as good as what it looks like at its best. And that's always hard to remember, 20 minutes after a game ends, but right. We'll talk about all the different stuff, but it is a disappointing outcome where we did think the Nets maybe the thought of maybe stealing a game in here in Philly had us a little geeked up a little, but that just didn't come to pass.
We may look back once upon a time here and say we got a little out over our skis in building up to this series. But to your point, the key takeaway from this game was the strategy that the Brooklyn Nets chose to go with against Joel Embiid. And that was keeping him away from the basket, double teaming him out on the perimeter, and trying to force anybody else, including perimeter shooters, to beat them. You can look at the box score, and Joel Embiid is always going to get his, but I actually agree with it. And I think that the Brooklyn Nets survived on that strategy. The hard part is, and frankly, the final numbers here don't do justice, how hot Philadelphia shot from the outside. Ends up being 48%, which is high, but 21 of 43. At one point, they were over 60% from beyond the arc, and that was brutal. But they had a clear plan in mind. Do you agree that it was the right strategy? Because you need to kind of separate yourself from results, because that can be damning, especially after a 20-point loss.
Yeah, I do think this was the correct strategy. It's hard to say that when you lose by 20. I'm fully aware of this, that it's very difficult to stand on the shoulders of a strategy that just lost by, again, 20 points. But it was very clear from the beginning that the operating procedure for the Nets was going to be Joel Embiid gets doubled every time he touches the ball. It does not matter where it is. We cannot get caught in the pick and roll switches with him where he's just going to walk somebody down into the dunker and dunk over them. Mm-hmm. And what we saw all game was the Nets trying to take away parts of the game for Embiid that are so lethal. He has many parts of his game that are lethal. One is getting a smaller or weaker defender up near the top of the key and just kind of barreling downhill against that guy.
Yeah.
Getting a pick and roll with Harden where he gets into a really advantageous switch that he can get the guy down into the block on, or just being able to operate from the nail where he's like unbelievably efficient. Like if you could think about little one-legged Joel Embiid step back from the free throw line, which is like freaking automatic. None of that really happened here. The Nets were fully committed to a double basically every time. Like help defense came in the form of DFS. It came in the form of Mikhail. Like they brought doubles, I mean, kind of every time he touched the ball. And that is going to have down chain effects, which we're going to talk about. But from that strategic standpoint, I think that was probably correct. I maybe would have switched a couple things here and like who the first initial defender was.
Sure.
Maybe they do that next game. But in terms of doubling Embiid and allowing everyone else to kind of see what happens, I think on a high level, I agree with that strategy, at least to come out and try it to begin with.
Yeah, and I think, listen, it's going to get skewed a little bit because the game gets away late, but over 33 minutes, so if needed, obviously, Embiid could have played more. 7 of 15, 1 of 4 from beyond the arc, got to the line 11 times, was perfect there, 26 points. You know, in the world where Joel Embiid can go for 40 plus on you, if you allow him that access in and around the basket, all the things that you highlighted there, yeah, like we always talk about this, even in in-season matchups. I want the best player to be as ineffective or as underutilized as possible. And I'll live with the results off of that. So to your point, I think it's right. Before we talk about what ends up being the byproduct of that, the perimeter shooting, you just touched on something there about maybe doing something a little bit different, you know, and I don't want to get too far ahead in terms of going forward, but it's funny because my immediate thought was, right, maybe you're a little bit better off if Nicolas Claxton is the guy that's helping and ranging over because we know how athletic and versatile he is. And maybe it's a little more DFS, taking that first point of attack defense against Joel Embiid. Things that we'll talk about before game 2. But whether you want to tweak the execution, I still do agree with the strategy. And then we get to the other side of this, which was the Philadelphia 76ers having 13 three-point makes in the first half, highest in franchise history in a playoff game for them. They were absolutely in fuego from beyond the arc. And it's easy to see that happen in real time and go, man, what a disaster. But that is the lesser of two evils that you're willing to live with.
Yeah, look, you can't double someone on one team and not expect other things to happen. It just doesn't work that way. It's
six player
if you're going to double, and some teams are good enough to like kind of just stay connected and defense enough to kind of make up for it. The Nets, I don't think are that crew. But in terms of like, if you're going to commit to double teaming a certain player, there are going to be other things that happen. And sometimes those other things are going to make it look like you don't know what you're doing on defense. Like, so for instance, a double team on Embiid is going to leave open shooters. And that's just what you're going to have to live with. Those shooters are going to be like PJ Tucker from the corner or Tobias Harris above the break or like whatever. You know, it's not going to be Harden as much because they're not going to sacrifice the double. Like no, Harden's guys never helping, but like in terms of the rest of the guys, that's what's going to happen. Like Embiid's going to make those reads sometimes and sometimes he's not. Like he made a lot of pretty good reads in this game, right? The other thing that's going to happen is that you are taking another defender away from being able to rebound. And so this is why you're going to allow possibly second chance points from the other team because you are taking one guy out of the paint to deal with getting rebounds off misses. Those are things that can happen. I want to just caution people against saying like, you know, they got to rebound better. Some of this is a byproduct of the initial strat. A lot of this is the byproduct of the initial strategy. The initial strategy is to stop this one guy. Look, these are NBA teams. Other things, they're going to have other advantages, whether or not you think that advantages the juice is going to be worth the squeeze. Does that make sense? Like I don't know. Yeah. They might try something else. Maybe you try not doubling Embiid next game and see what happens. I don't think I would go that strategy, but like that could be a pivot, I suppose.
Coming up here in a second, we'll talk about the positives for the Brooklyn Nets, Mikal Bridges, Cam Johnson. Like there are really big, I mean, maybe these are higher level takeaways when we talk about getting the first sample of Mikal Bridges and Cam Johnson on the Brooklyn Nets in these roles for this playoff roster. But just to put a pin in it, and I think we'll flesh this out as we go into game number 2. I guess the question would become, do you want 42-point attempts from Joel Embiid or the volume of three-pointers, right? And that's, I think, what'll loom over the Brooklyn Nets between game 1 and game 2, the decision they make there. But we dive in on, yes, the positives coming up next.
I make myself feel a little better here. I talked about our friends over at Prize Picks. Prize Picks daily fantasy made easy. All you're doing on Prize Picks is you're making entries and you're going more or less on their player projections. You're not going against other sharks in the water. You're not wrangling with salaries like some of these other DFS sites. It's just you versus whatever Prize Picks put up. And what I'd say the projections, I'm talking like points, rebounds, assists, blocks, steals, everything for an individual player. You take 2 to 6 players. You figure out if they're going to score more or less on those Prize Picks projections. You can win up to 25 times your money on any entry. Like I said, it's not you competing against other folks. It's just you versus Prize Picks. Take them up on the challenge. Not just NBA, MLB, NHL heading into the playoffs, PGA, all the major events. It's all there for you on Prize Picks. Safe and fast withdrawals. You can make entries in less than 60 seconds. Over 30 states and Canada is where they're operational. Download the Prize Picks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with a promo code Locked On. Don't forget to enter promo code Locked On at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks is daily fantasy made easy.
Okay, so before we dive in on Mikal Bridges' performance, which quite frankly was nothing short of superstar level in this game 1 matchup with Philadelphia, I will just put a pin in living with the results of that strategy and maybe why the Brooklyn Nets should go right back to the well on Joel Embiid. Like, everything being equal, you take Melton out 2 of 7 from beyond the arc. As I said at the top, Philadelphia finishes 21 of 43, almost 49% from the field. James Harden was 7 of 13 from beyond the arc. Like, let's just live in the world, man. We know once upon a time, James Harden could only brick 3-pointers in the playoffs. He is 1 of 8 from the field without his 3-point shooting. Now, you don't just take it off the box score, but like we know what James Harden is. We know this team is collectively. They have a lot of great 3-point shooters. But if you're going to tell me that James Harden is going to go out and hit over 50% from beyond the arc with consistency going forward in this series, all right, listen, man, so be it. Like, whatever the results are going to be. But the world where the Nets did leave a lot of open perimeter shooters for Philadelphia, yes, Tobias Harris knocked down his 3 attempts. You mentioned PJ Tucker, 2 of 5. Maxey was 4 of 4 from deep. Okay, those went down. But the volume came from James Harden. And argue, you can make the case that, like, you can play the exact same strategy out, and Harden is far less likely than more likely to repeat that type of volume from deep.
Yeah, look, the Sixers ended up doing what I wanted the Nets to do, was bomb 43s. That's what I kind of was hoping the Brooklyn would come out here and do. We'll talk about some of the problem areas for the Nets on offense in a minute. But yeah, they shot really efficiently from 3. The Sixers did. A lot of them were very good looks. So I can't take it too much into the luck category on that one. But I also don't think there's an expectation that your opponent's going to shoot 50% from 3 on 43 attempts for the rest of the series. So I think there is some earth to drop down to on that number. Nets were efficient themselves from 3, but their volume wasn't just anywhere close to what is needed in a matchup like this. So I do think there's a world where that that does kind of regress to its own individual mean to some degree, but the looks are always going to be decent. Like, that's in this strategy, these are going to be pretty good looks. These aren't going to be like pull up, off the dribble 3s. Like, these are going to be clean looks if you're bringing help defense a lot. So we can get into what the Nets did, but I do think there's room for the Sixers to fall in that category for sure.
Yeah. Now, if we look over to the Brooklyn Nets here, we know Mikal Bridges comes over in the trade for Kevin Durant and the Phoenix Suns. We also get Cam Johnson in there as well. Mikal Bridges has played to a near 30-point scorer per game since coming over to Brooklyn. The big question was, can he be that guy when it matters most? And speaking to that bombing of 3s for Brooklyn, first and foremost, Mikal Bridges is that guy. 34 minutes, 12 of 18, 2 of 4 from deep, got to the line 4 times, knocked those down. The rebounds, the whole game is there. 30-point performance from him. Before we even talk about the mid-range game and how effective he was in it, I mean, that's really where we start and stop, I think. He was so effective in that area that maybe it mitigated 4 or 5 more 3-point attempts you could have seen from him. And I take that as an overwhelming positive because he was able to go into the teeth of the defense, whether it was on switches, etc., and rise up and knock down those shots with consistency. consistency, this was an absolute box checking performance from him in terms of, can he be a centerpiece for your franchise going forward? 1000% yes.
Yeah, for sure. That was one of our big questions going into this, was like, would his game translate to a playoff atmosphere? We definitely thought it would. So there was this was just like a nice box to check in terms of, we felt like this was going to happen, and he came out and was about as efficient as you can get. It's really nice for him. His game is sort of predicated on a way to attack this Philly D, which is, if you're going to attack the Joel Embiid drop coverage, if you can play in the mid range, you will have some success here. And Mikhail is very, very, very good in the mid range, and he had that on display. He had a lot of mid range shots rising up and over Joel. He was able to beat the initial defender. They're not going to switch that ever. So it's going to be Embiid in the drop. We'll talk about why that gave Nets problems for basically everyone else. But for Bridges, his game, like most of the times in the current NBA, you want your shots to be threes or dunks, basically. Like threes, layups, dunks. Like that's really the math problem. Like you don't want to live too many other places. There is a select group of players that are allowed to live with those in those areas because they're super efficient. Kevin Durant is the guy they created in the lab to do this, right? Kyrie was really, really good too. Or amazing. I shouldn't even say really good. Mikhail has this in his bag, and that is why you give up some of those 3-point looks for good mid-range shots when they're just basically going to be open and automatic. It was a nice box checking moment for him, I think, to be like, hey, and it was correct what they did. It was like, hey, this is how you attack this drop coverage. He's the guy that can do it. Yes. And one guy on the Nets team that can do it. Maybe like Cam Thomas could do it or something. I don't know, but like, he's not going to play. The other thing with, I was going to say one more thing about Mikhail. Maybe I need you to, sorry. This is my last piece about Mikhail. You have arrived at the next level when the other team has decided that they're going to blitz you. Like we just talked about Joel Embiid and how he's going to dictate double teams. They were double teaming Mikhail like for a lot of the second half because they're like, this is the only chance the Nets have to score. They were right. Right? Like that was correct. That was correct to do. But you've kind of arrived at the next level when another team has changed their defensive approach to deal with just you specifically. And the Sixers definitely did that with Mikal Bridges.
And going forward in this series will be interesting to watch because, again, we talk about the two-way player that Mikhail is. He can very much take on the James Harden assignment and do that with ease. We saw that in season when he made his debut against Philadelphia, but also offensively. I said it very early. You and I watched this game together very early on. I was like, oh, okay. So he can go ahead and just take James Harden off the dribble whenever he chooses to, right? Can turn that corner and get downhill at the basket. And then you mentioned all the switching defense and still being able to do it. The question that we'll look at going forward, and probably in our next preview of Game 2 episode, is going to be what happens when he starts getting blitzed and how can the Nets adjust to that to make sure they can have success and keep themselves in the game. The other player for me here that I think we'll talk about, I know, because we talk about, we're going to cover the team on this show, is going to be Cam Johnson, because he was the other big name here. We know the offseason. We know the contract. You could make the case here, and we'll discuss it in a moment, how Cam Johnson just had his best performance as a Brooklyn Net in the game when it mattered the most, and maybe did check that contract box off as well.
Yeah, Cam Johnson is, he's another guy that was going to need to step up. He played really, really well. I don't know. Maybe I wonder if you're a little higher on this performance than I am, but that's fine. It's one of these situations where we definitely needed to see like he needed to look like he can hang on the court. That happened 100%. Is he like a complete enough player to play like as a second fiddle in a playoff series? Like, I'm not totally sure about that one yet. I don't know if that was what you meant by is that what you meant? Like where you see him on the hierarchy, or?
If you push me for, do I see him as being the number 2 on a playoff team? That's probably not where I want him, but I think he ends up being a very a borderline elite third player on a playoff team when you go inside those stats. And we could break that down a little bit deeper here, but I will say I am pretty high on this performance from him, given the stage and the assignments that he had.
Yeah, I'm a little confused about where he landed on the minutes too. I felt like the minutes ended up being a little on the low side. Maybe we can, I know this ended up being a blowout. I'm going to levy a bunch of complaints here. I think you are too. We're going to save some of the complaining here for probably the last part, because there was some head scratching moments in this one for sure. We'll get into some of those in a second. First, going to tell you about our friends over at Built Bar. We've been talking about Built forever now. That's because it's super easy. They have amazing flavors. They have protein bars that are actually good for you, and they actually taste good. And if you've dipped your toes into the protein bar world in the past, you know that is not everyone's operating procedure when it comes to flavor. But Built has figured this out. They started with the flavors. They back it up with the stats. They cover these things in 100% real chocolate. They're healthy and they taste amazing. I don't know how they do it, but they do when you back it up. 17 grams of protein, just 4 grams of sugar, only 130 calories. You can find Built at your Walmart, your Sam's Club. You can go to built.com to grab them. They're really available wherever you're doing your shopping or online. Cookies and cream, double chocolate, coconut puffs, just some of the flavors that you're going to get from Built. So if you're close to Walmart, you're close to Sam's Club, run in and grab a 13-bar box, hit them up with the brownie batter puff or the churro puff as well. You can thank me later, or you can go to built.com.
Okay, so just quickly tying a bow on the positives before we get into some of the gripes here. On Cam Johnson, like I'll just say, maybe the minutes because he gets off the court a little bit sooner there as things start to get away in the fourth. Only plays 27. When the numbers work, we like to use it. -7 in the plus minus category. Now, his assignments defensively are going to look a little bit different. 7 of 11, 4 of 6 from beyond the arc. The rebounds are there. There's a couple of times where, he looks a little bit rough around the edges on both ends of the floor. And there's a lot of players you could point to like that. I just think, he's not a spring chicken, 26, going to be 27 years old next year. I just thought that there was never really a time when I looked at Cam Johnson on the court and said, oh boy. And there are guys that you can do that with that matter to this team, right? And the one other player before we go negative here is Nicolas Claxton. This is where the old box score is not going to tell you the value of a player. Just 5 points, 30 minutes, 2 of 4. He more than held his own in the Joel Embiid assignment. We know the versatility he has defensively. He's picking up Maxey out on the perimeter at stretches in this game too. I think that he did everything you wanted him to do in this game. The problem is the Brooklyn Nets don't have another guy that can do some level of that to alleviate it for Nicolas Claxton. And obviously, I will say, as we start to go that way, the lack of offensive repertoire for Nicolas Claxton does become a little more glaring in this game. It's not really a knock on him. It's just a reality.
Yeah, I agree with that assessment of Claxton. I think that this is always, again, this is going to be a really, really tough thing for him. Embiid's the best center at worst, the second best center in the whole league. And some would just say he's the best. He probably just is the best. He and Jokic are so different that it's like weird to even compare them. They kill you in totally different ways. So, comparative wise, whatever. He's just like about as difficult of an assignment as you can really ever have. The Nets had really, really some major problems here. Dinwiddie had a rough game, and he might just have a rough series. Like this series is not built for him. This is not actually anti Spencer Dinwiddie as much as it's like pro how Philly defends, and like what Dinwiddie does really well does not line. It lines up perfectly for Philly to defend it because he's really good at getting to the rim. He's really good at sort of turning the corner on slower defenders. He's pretty good in the step back. Like he can't do any of that. And it looked pretty bad. Like because you can't get to the rim against this Philly team. Like Embiid is there in that drop and he's going to wipe away everything. And the Nets, this is why time and again, basically anyone that went to the rim for the Nets today was swallowed completely whole. And Dinwiddie needs that part of his game. And you could see it kind of getting to him because what ended up happening was not only could he not finish, but then like the 2-man lob game on the pick and dive, I mean, that looked even worse. Like that was as bad as you will ever see 2-man games with lobs on rim running. I actually don't know if I've ever seen it worse. It was so bad, really from everyone on the Nets, but Dinwiddie really struggled in this one. And it's a shame. He's been the Nets' second best player here for months now. So it's just this matchup is really, really going to be tough for what he wants to do.
And you and I talked about this coming into this game, that it needed to be Mikhail Bridges and Spencer Dinwiddie being your 2 highest point scorers, being the guys that were carrying the load and then everyone else playing off of him. Cam Johnson having 18 points is excellent and his performance is great. But what you need to have above him and behind Mikhail is a Spencer Dinwiddie 20-point performance, 20 plus point performance in a game like this. It's funny when we were watching it in real time, I said, man, how many assists does he even have? He had 6 and he only ended up finishing with 7. To your point, and it goes really on both ends of the floor here. Offensively, it just never seemed like he could quite figure out what the execution was supposed to be. We talked a little bit, we won't get into him much here, Dorian Finney-Smith, who had all the opportunities because that's what Philadelphia was going to give up. And he just seemed confused about, what do I need to be doing here? But when DFS does that, you go, but that's the hierarchy. You should be confused a little bit because you're never asked to do it normally. For Spencer Dinwiddie, it just seemed like he got caught in between. Should I be attacking? Well, I can't attack because the paint's going to be clogged. Okay, lean into facilitator mode. The perimeter shots, I know that when they go in, it's good, but almost every one of his 5 attempts from beyond the arc were chuckers, in the purest sense of Spencer Dinwiddie form. And then defensively, it's a really difficult matchup. We talked about it against James Harden when you get caught into those switches because you don't have that length and this is Doug Norrie's words telling me in game, that length of a Mikhail Bridges to be able to recover when Harden wants to step back away from you. And you're not quite quick enough if he wants to turn the corner on you. When Harden is getting around the corner on you, that's when you're really between a rock and a hard place. So it was. And all of that to say, it's not an indictment on Spencer Dinwiddie. It's an indictment on Spencer Dinwiddie in this series, in this matchup specifically. And it's going to be hard for him to, I think, figure that out shy of, you tell me, him doing significantly more facilitating and allowing everyone else is going to need to pick up the scoring load here. Because I think that's actually his most effective attribute in this game and in this series. And I don't know if that's going to be, I know it's not going to be enough. Frankly, I know it's not going to be enough. He needs to be a 20-10 guy, and he may only be able to be a 15 assist, 12-point guy.
Yeah. Like I said, think about what you see that Spencer Dinwiddie does really well. He gets to the rim. He wants to draw contact. He wants to get to the line. He always thinks he's fouled, right? Like these are the areas that he's thrived in, right? And there are going to be certain matchups where that does really work well from him. Getting into switches on bigger defenders that he can cook a little bit, but where he can't, like once Embiid drops, like it's kind of over for him. And he doesn't have a good pull-up game. Like he doesn't operate mid-range very well. Like he's not a really good off the dribble shooter for a facilitator. And that's kind of like what you need to be able to really attack the teeth of this Philly defense. I do wonder if the next couple games we'll see like a little bit more like earlier Mikhail actions, like just because or just like that 2-man game trying to work a little bit better because they just know they have to live in the mid-range a little more with Bridges. I mean, it's hard to imagine his usage going higher. But I do think it's like, this is a problematic thing because while I don't think the Philly point of attack defense is all that good, it's like, that doesn't matter for Dinwiddie. Like he doesn't want to do that. Like, that's not a situation he wants to attack over and over again. So this will be what's interesting to watch. I do wonder what's going to kind of happen with that. But this was rough. It was a rough one to watch. The timing for basically everything he was doing was way, way off.
And by the way, here, just point of order, because we're coming in on the weekend here. We'll be back in for post game on Monday night for game number 2. So as far as additional adjustments, keep an eye on us over on Twitter at Adam Armbrecht, at Doug Norrie, because that's where we're going to be talking about a lot of these types of things. What do you go to next from here? Because we won't have a full preview episode ahead of that. So just a little bit of show keeping there. Let's close out on the big gripe. You can say you want to play Joe Harris. You can say you want to play Seth Curry. What you can't do is say you want to play Seth Curry and Joe Harris together. We both have been on this hill. Seth Curry did everything he could to make us eat crow because he had a good performance, but that hasn't been the gripe. It's that you can't put these guys on the court together. They did get away from it, but it was borderline criminal that Jacque Vaughn was willing to put them out there together to start at a certain point in this game when they come off the bench together. You and I were both equally shocked, and then they went to timeout and came back and still had them both on the court together, which really sent Doug off the edge.
Yeah, I don't think this is like why they lost, but it sure didn't help them win. I know the shots went in, and I that actually for me doesn't, depending on what is actually happening, doesn't matter all that much to me. I think process wise, I just don't understand why these are the rotations. Like why a Joe Harris and Seth Curry is your first rotation you think is going to like press Philly into like any real clear disadvantage. They tried to zone at one point with the two of them. It was like you and I playing zone. I don't know why they did it. These guys are just too It's too easy to pick on both of them defense wise. The Sixers are never taking, they always have at least one elite ball handler on the court in Harden and Maxey, right? They have a good secondary guy in Melton. Like, they have a lot of ways to kill you. Like, having these guys on the court together in Curry and Harris does not make any sense to me. The numbers back it up. They have 400 plus minutes without Durant this year. It's been a total train wreck. Like, it's like minus 10 net rating when you take like basically any combination of like one other superstar off the court with these guys. It's bad. And it doesn't pass the eye test either. Like, I just don't, I don't understand this as a strategy. They've continued to go to this for most of the second half of the season when Curry's been healthy. There's been no point where it's looked very good unless these guys are shooting out of their minds from three. And even that is barely keeping their head above water. Like, it's only the insane 80% from three that Seth Curry shot that they weren't higher negatives, right? And so I know you just want to say, well, he made the shots. Yeah, I get it. But like, they were still huge negatives even when the shots were going in. Like, this is a really, really big problem. They have to adjust this. I don't totally get it. I don't know. We'll see. They made a few other minor adjustments. Like, Dorian Finney-Smith started on Harden in the second half. Like, there were little things that kind of went a little different here. But in general, I can't watch these lineups anymore. I just don't get them.
Yeah, and it's funny to me, and I'm only going to say this because we won't be in before the next matchup. Like, if you told me that you wanted to play Yuta Watanabe and Edmund Sumner instead of Joe Harris and Seth Curry, I can buy into it. Not because either one of those players is perfect, but because there's some other chance that they can do these other things. Both these players, Seth Curry and Joe Harris, have very clear limitations. And frankly, when you look at the box score, unless Seth Curry is going to do what he did, which is go 4 of 5 from the field and 2 of 3 from deep in 16 minutes and give you 10-point performance, unless he's going to add in what Royce O'Neal does when he's on the court, and I'm not saying Royce was perfect, 6 assists, unless you're going to tell me that Seth Curry can start doing a bit of that when he's on the floor, then everything else that you listed there, the obvious negatives we know about his game, specifically on the defensive end, I can't get behind it. And I know we can separate them and play one or the other, but neither one of them is going to be the answer for you. And it's just funny. At some point here, 30-year-old veterans that maybe don't have a big future on this team, it gets me back to this place of, for the feather in your cap of making the playoffs, there might be this delineation between expectations of what you'll do when you get there and honoring some of these veterans. That might be the only explanation I can give, and I would call it probably still inexcusable.
Yeah, I think that might be part of it. I'm not sure exactly. I can't find total explanations for that. So that's just it's a complaint, and we'll see what they're able to do. We will hang out here for a little bit in YouTube. If you're live in YouTube, much appreciated everyone that jumped in here on a Saturday afternoon with some of the off timing with the game. Much appreciated. If you have some questions you want us to address, hit up at Locked On Nets right there in chat. We'll try to bring some to answer, and we'll get to those. And if you're not following YouTube because you're listening on the podcast, I know what to tell you. You got to go follow at Locked On Nets on YouTube.
I don't think Joe Louis could take the punches today fighting in this era. That's Larry Holmes talking about boxing. Can the Brooklyn Nets recover from that first blow?
All right, we'll be back again tomorrow for some people or next week for others. We'll talk more Brooklyn Nets basketball.
Post-playoff podcast here. As Doug told you get them up there in the questions at Locked On Nets if you want to have the conversation. If you have any thoughts, I see Doug's been doing some lifting there, responding to some people already along the way, which is always nice to see. Thanks to everybody that came in here. Obviously, it's not as exciting when the Nets lose by 20. We didn't say this in the episode because it's not really worth discussing with all the other things we want to cover. But I did say, it's like symbolically, I said to you, I was like, I wish they, lose by 12 to 15. That feels in line with like how you played for 3/4 of this game. When you lose by 20 and you wave the white flag and Yuta and Cam Thomas are in there at the end of it, you go, that one hurts. And I maybe fans don't think about the same way as I do, but like, I think that the Nets did earn a respectable loss. And I know it doesn't matter. It's a loss, but I thought that the final score was a bit more brutal than how they played for most of this game, frankly.
Yeah, look, I actually thought they played mostly fine. I thought that this was, it's hard to like exactly pinpoint what I think. I went at the end of the podcast, talked a little bit about where I thought like some of the lineup decisions were a little weird. I did think we talked at the beginning why I thought some of the strategy that they used was correct. I think it's always going to be tough. But that strategy that they used against Embiid, I would do it again. I would do the same thing, exactly the same thing next game. I would not change that strategy at all, I don't think. Short of maybe like what we talked about, like who your primary defender is and who your help is for the Embiid double. But I thought like they mitigated, at least for the first half, like they really, he was kind of a non-factor-ish. It's hard to call someone a non-factor that you're doubling every time because they're clearly the whole factor. But like I think they got a lot of what they wanted out of that situation. It was just that the one thing we talked about, which was like, hey, if Harris and Tucker and these guys are going to hit all, and Harden are going to hit all their threes, like you're going to lose. Like that's it. I had this exact tweet. I was like, let these guys shoot. And if those guys hit their threes, whatever, you lose anyway. Like that kind of is exactly what happened here. But I get it's frustrating to watch.
And it's nuts because we don't do a lot of like the box score stuff usually, but 19 more shot attempts for Philadelphia in this game, 89-70. And we know how much they put up from beyond the arc. Yeah.
I want to bring one of these. I just before you go to the next comment, I want to just I'm just going to bring this up right here because I want to say one more thing about this. Sorry to interrupt you, but I just didn't want to just move on and move back. Okay, so here's the thing. I see this a lot. He's going to, and I'm not picking on anyone here, but it says he's going to score regardless. That's true, and it's not true. The thing is, what's hard to look at is when the team is still scoring, even when you are doubling Embiid. Like that's a hard thing to watch. It's like, hey, we doubled them and they still scored. So like, what was the point? I get it. Go back and watch this game on the possessions where they did not double him. It was like so easy for him. There's a couple possessions where they don't double him at the either like not fouling extent, where they don't double him from the 3-point line or like the nail. He literally just like walks to the rim and dunks. Yeah. Right. So if you don't double him, that is what is going to happen instead. And so I get why it's sometimes hard to see it this way, because the thought is, well, hey, we doubled them and they still scored. So what was the point in doubling them? I get that. But there's this other world where Embiid has these two other things in his bag, which are like totally unstoppable. One is getting downhill to the basket. You cannot stop him. It's like, he gets fouled all the time on this, right? And he's either going to the line or he's going to dunk, or he just stops and rises up over some smaller defender and hits this automatic, basically foul shot for 2 points, right? Yep. That is what you'll see over and over again if they don't do this. So that's my answer to this. Like, he's going to score regardless. Yeah, he's always going to score points, but like it's how hard you make the points. That's the question. Yeah. Like the scoring will always happen. It's how hard it was is the answer.
No, and I 100% agree with. And I know, and he said we're not picking on any one person, because a lot of people are bringing that up. But it is, again, it's results oriented. And to your point about, I'll just tag into the DFS one. I think one of the benefits of maybe switching to that at the point of attack is that Nicolas Claxton, you can argue, if when they double team him or they help off of him, but if it's going to get kicked out, Nick Claxton is going to be more capable of recovering to the perimeter or recovering to where that ball goes to more readily than Dorian Finney-Smith is. Not a knock on Dorian Finney-Smith. Nick Claxton's a more athletic, more versatile defender, right? So there probably is some benefit there.
And a great weak side shot blocker.
Yes. Like you're going to get that recovery element as well. Yeah, let him be the guy that helps you recover, not DFS. Yes. So I think those things really matter to me. And I said this to you when we were watching it about, well, the flip side of it is you just let Embiid steamroll you for 50 points, but they're only 2-pointers. The only way that first off, that's a hideous look, because then it just looks like you're just opening up the gates and letting Embiid walk down. And there actually is the world where he is so efficient and so effective in all the areas you talk about that it actually still dumpsters you, because it's not the, well, low in shot clock and maybe it'll be a bad percentage. No. He's going to steamroll down the lane in one-on-one situations and be jamming the ball like he did on that play where Dorian Finney-Smith ended up fouling him and he went down hard. Like, that's going to be time and time again. You can make the case you want to get physical and let Day'Ron Sharpe pick up 6 fouls in 2 minutes on him and try to, do that. Sure. But that's not going to be a viable strategy long-term.
And you're going to have your better guys out of the game really quick. Like, again, they lost. Like, remember what did not happen. No one was in foul trouble here. The other way they stayed sort of above water here was to, like, Claxton had 2 fouls. Like, that's a miracle. He had 2 fouls in 30 minutes playing Joel Embiid. Like, that's, I don't know, is it a win? It's not a win, but it's like something. It's like foul trouble is the single biggest thing you worry about with these guys. Yep. The other thing is you keep your best players on the court for longer by not inducing fouls and having them have to leave the game. Because when he is playing one-on-one with these guys near the basket, multiple guys are going to be in foul trouble. Like, that's it. Claxton will be in foul trouble 100%. I mean, Sharp, whatever, he'll be in foul trouble. DFS will be in foul trouble. They'll all be in foul trouble because they are trying to contend with an immovable object going to the rim, and they're just going to commit fouls. And Embiid's awesome at drawing fouls. The rip through, he's awesome at the rip through move. And so, like, the Nets didn't have foul trouble. I don't know. I'm just trying to find positives here. This is where I think some of this is correct.
Yeah, and two things real quick. You made the note of when we were watching the game. You were like, great job by Nick Claxton not getting the foul on the rip-through move from Embiid. Like, Claxton showed enough presence of mind to say, yeah, I'm going to try to affect the shot, but I'm not here taking easy fouls, where, by the way, Embiid 9 times out of 10 finishes that shot anyway. I'm going to do 2 quick ones here before we get to your next starred one. Jay, does this really matter? The only thing that matters was Bridges showed up and Claxton as well. That happened. Listen, it's a both and. Yes, 1,000%. Doug and I said it all throughout the game watching it. This is exactly what you wanted to see. Mikhail Bridges can play in a playoff series like this, can be the leader of your team. All those things. It's incredible. Nick Claxton, no Kevin Durant here, no Kyrie Irving, can still be an effective player. Yes, it's all great. Also, we're in a playoff series. So, yes, it matters in the sense of you want to see the Brooklyn Nets try to win a game or two off of Philadelphia. That seems very unlikely after game one, but if you're going to tell me that it doesn't matter if the Brooklyn Nets in this iteration of the team gets swept or don't get swept, I could make the case that it does matter. Really quick here, before your next starred one. I don't so disappointed in Cam Johnson. I listen, am I over hyping Doug and I was high on his performance as I was? I don't know what else you want from the guy, though. He knocked down his perimeter shots successfully. He plays good defense. Like, he had a very solid game for himself. I'm not sure. I don't know what else you'd want from him specifically. In my hierarchy of things that I was frustrated by in this game, Cam Johnson doesn't make the board for me.
Yeah. I don't think he had a bad game. I don't think that I don't think he had like a great game, but I don't think that I wasn't looking at his game being like, oh, what's the problem here? I thought that it was pretty much what you want from him.
And by the way, a little bit of that's expectations around the offseason, the contract. And I think, if you're starting to say, hey, you got to be a $20 to $25 million type of player.
Yeah.
Then that's gonna skew you as well. You had this one queued up here. I think it's okay to let Tobias Harris, Harden, step back 3, and PJ Tucker beat us on offense. Our offense, was great, but we just don't have any easy button like the Sixers do. I think it's a very good way to put it. Yeah.
One and you can see that the difference in like what Faraz is saying too is like the highlighted difference is when the Nets start getting Mikal Bridges blitzed, like they don't have a way out. Right. Like there was no other player to like kind of take the ease out of that situation. And they're already playing with, if DFS is going to play, he's already kind of one non-shooter ish kind of guy. And then you obviously have Claxton. So like you're going to be in offense. And we talked about the problems with Dinwiddie in this matchup I think they were fine. I think they're like, we don't need to bring any stuff on Dinwiddie here. Like he can't do anything. Yeah. Like and that's gonna, if they continue to feel that, like they're never gonna have to help off him at all. Even on like defensive assignments that he beats and drop, like it might not look a lot better. It sucks. I've loved Dinwiddie's play here. It's just just the wrong matchup, man. It's like literally anything else. I guess Milwaukee be tough too with Lopez, but it's just a tough matchup for him. If he's just like one step below the kind of shot creator you need here. And it's just not in his bag.
Yeah. As you said, it's going to be a hard one because I think every game we may find ourselves talking about him. By the way, he could just be one, a little bit better shooting performance, even with the areas that he's still going to struggle. If you tell me he goes 7 to 12 instead of 5 and knocks down a couple of those triples, yeah, it's going to reflect differently at the end of the game. You queue one up if you have one. We'll obviously start to wrap this one up. It's a Saturday. We've had a bit of a busy day as it is. I will throw out, and somebody mentioned this. The only reason why I'm bringing it up, somebody said like if the Nets are down 0-3, at that point, can't you just throw in some Cam Thomas? There is this thing about, and we've talked about it very clearly about the same thing with Curry, right? He can be scoring points. But if it's bad minutes for the team overall, it doesn't make it a positive or a thing to say, hey, he did great. 40-point performances from Cam Thomas. In a matchup like this, doesn't mean it's going to be easy, but I can visualize how alleviating the pressure on Mikal Bridges in some of those moments can come off of having a guy like Cam Thomas, who is the on-ball shot creator and is all of the things that Spencer Dinwiddie lacks. I don't anticipate it happening, but there is the world where it maybe should at some point, knowing what this series is ultimately going to look like.
Man, I wish Cam was just like 30% better of a passer. Like it's just like this. It's just this one thing that's just so problematic with him. It's like, he doesn't need to be a great passer. I just wish he was a passer or could pass. Like he doesn't pass at all. I was looking this up the other day, by the way. It was, I wonder if I deleted it. I'll try to find it real quick. It was guards that had the highest points to assist ratio, which we get, like, the most the amount of points you score, compared to how many times you assist the ball. And, shooting guards are generally going to be like this, just because, like, that's just the nature of shooting guard. You're going to play off ball, you're going to look for shots, and then you're just going to try to make them. The list was really interesting. And I'm vamping a little bit so I can find it. Yeah, I got it. But it was like this funny list of, like, either the guys were like great or like you don't want them anywhere near your team, basically. And the guys that were great in these categories brought something else on like a different level that you could envision. So like, okay, so the top guy is Bennedict Mathurin. He's like a rookie, whatever. Those guys are usually gonna have stats like that because there was a tanking team. You're just gonna shoot a ton and like whatever, score a lot. Gary Trent can't really stay on the court for Toronto. Garrison Matthews can't stay on the court. Hamidou Diallo can't stay on the court all for Detroit and couldn't score. He's got a weird, like, didn't pass and wasn't efficient. Then you get to like Klay Thompson. You're like, oh, okay, you got Klay. That's like the next guy. You're like, now I'm talking, but we know Klay at his time has been elite defender. And they run a totally different system. And he's like, there's no analog. He's not a player like Cam Thomas, right? He's just kind of like spot up three. And that's it. And then it's like Shaedon Sharpe, rookie. And then it's Cam Thomas. Like, the list is weird around these guys that, like, with this kind of profile. And I know I'm just picking out this one stat, which is scoring to assists, but it's the eye test with him too. It's like, you just don't do, first of all, this list is like not filled with great players for the most part, right? Like, it's like, it's not a list filled with superstars to start. Guys who score a ton and don't ever pass. The list is like not exactly, you got to be built a certain way. And you better be like really good at something else. Like the next guy is Jaylen Brown. Jaylen Brown can defend 4 positions, right? Like Cam Thomas can't defend any. So like, my point is, I know people want to see him, but like, it's just not there. It's not all the way there for him. It's the playoffs. I don't know.
No,
that makes sense what I'm saying.
Oh yeah, no, 100%. I mean, it's the thing we always talk about with him. There are people that say like, as a 40-point scorer, there's clear, like, why isn't he playing? There's clear reasons why he doesn't play. And it's like, I don't know. Sometimes I feel like I bring it up because it's for exactly what we saw, right? When you lose by 20 and you feel like, whatever could have been better, should have looked different. You look at things that you have on this roster and say, why not? It's why I brought up Yuta Watanabe and Edmund Sumner in the episode, like, because you look and see things that don't work and you want to say, show me something else that does work. And the one thing we didn't mention is, and you said this when we were watching, it's like in season, we thought the Brooklyn Nets after the trade were like, hey, they're a deep team, if not high-end talented team. But then we came a little bit of a reality check. It's like, they're not a terribly deep team, right? Like, they kind of need a better guy over top of DFSR in the starting lineup. And Royce is fine coming off the bench, but you can't start him either. Like, they're actually not a terribly deep team. And some of their best players, like Spencer Dinwiddie, is not a matchup-proof player. Mikhail Bridges is proving that he can be, right? After that, they don't really have those kind of guys. The one thing the Nets didn't do, though, if I could just buoy everyone's spirits here, they weren't getting dumpstered by almost 30 in the second quarter like Atlanta.
Oh, yeah,
just hit a couple threes here. So
got Atlanta Boston on. Yeah, there you go. That series is a total wrap. I thought Atlanta would be able to do something with Boston. I didn't think they'd really win any games, but I will say, just because why not here, we'll close out. But I will say that watching that Atlanta playing game, I was like, wow, it doesn't really matter who wins this. Like, it just wasn't the kind of game, even make it interesting. I thought the Western Conference was a little bit more fun. You're like, oh, okay, those will create some fun matchups. That's mostly because it isn't the same hierarchy like the East. Like Boston and Milwaukee, yeah, they're kind of supposed to. Yeah, it's just like, hey, who's going to be cannon fodder for the Celtics? Cool. Like,
right. What a brutal way to go into the play and be like, hey, man, you want to get dumpstered? Come on, let's go for it. So.
Yeah, I think that organizationally they need to do it. Okay.
Yeah.
Really appreciate everyone jumping in here to YouTube. We're going to go hang out the rest of this Saturday. We'll be back again on Monday following the Nets win over the Sixers in game 2 of the playoffs. Appreciate everyone for jumping into YouTube in the meantime.